The moment I walked into the courtroom, my mother laughed under her breath, quiet but cruel, like she'd waited her whole life for this. My father just shook his head, already ashamed to call me his daughter. Anastasia Crowell. That's the name they once taught people to whisper about. A disappointment. A disgrace. I used to believe them. I let their words bury me alive. But not today. Because today, they were about to learn exactly what their forgotten daughter had become. The courtroom smelled of cold marble and paper, sterile, judgmental. My heels struck the floor in a steady rhythm that didn't match the chaos pulsing in my veins. On the front bench, my mother pressed her lips together to hide a laugh that slipped out anyway. Thin and cutting. My father exhaled through his nose, slow and disappointed, like he'd already accepted the shame of being seen with me again. The judge froze mid-motion, his gavel suspended in the air. His eyes widened for half a breath before he leaned toward the clerk. I didn't need to hear him whisper, but I did. Dear God. Is that her? The words moved through the room like static. Heads turned, conversations stopped. For a moment, every sound evaporated except the hum in my chest. I kept walking. Each step echoed off the walls, measured, deliberate. The folder in my hand felt heavier than it should have. 7 years' worth of silence wrapped in paper. I met my parents' eyes just long enough to watch certainty flicker behind their smug expressions. They thought they'd already won. When I reached the table, I laid the folder down gently, the sound sharp in the quiet. My mother shifted, her smile faltering. My father stared straight ahead. The judge still hadn't spoken. They believed I was here to defend myself. They couldn't see that they were the ones on trial. Light glinted off the metal edge of the desk, catching on the papers I'd spent half my life preparing. I let the silence stretch until it hurt. Then I lifted my chin, voice calm and steady. "Let's begin," I said. My mother stopped laughing. From the outside, we looked flawless, America's polished ideal of success. Raymond Crowell, my father, the silver-tongued patriarch of one of Oregon's largest real estate empires. Vivian, his elegant wife, adored at charity galas and photographed for her grace. And Elliot, their golden son, the heir who could do no wrong. Behind that glass facade, the truth had cracks no one dared to see. I once worked beside them, running the company when my father's health began to falter. Every number balanced, every report clean. I believed discipline and transparency could save a legacy built on pride. They called it coldness. In 2014, when the housing market crashed, I spent everything I had, nearly $400,000, to keep Crowell Estates afloat and to make sure the employees got their paychecks. I thought saving them meant saving us. I was wrong. 3 months later, when profits returned and the company steadied, my position was terminated. The official reason, manipulation of financial records. The real reason, I'd become inconvenient. That night, at dinner, the chandelier shimmered above the table like a spotlight on my humiliation. My mother sliced her steak delicately, her voice as soft as it was cruel. "You were born to care, not to command." I laughed then, quietly, because rage would have proven her right. That was the first time I felt the blood in my veins turn cold. I walked out with nothing but a file of financial statements and the certainty that someday they'd pay for the lie they built together. They thought I'd vanished, but I was just waiting for them to write their own verdict. 5 years later, in my small apartment overlooking Pearl District, a plain brown parcel waited at my door. No sender, no return address, just my name scrawled across the top. Inside was an envelope sealed with fading wax. The handwriting was unmistakable. My grandfather's, for her eyes only, G. Crowell. My fingers trembled as I unfolded the papers inside. Each page bore his signature, each line clear. Every asset, property, and share was left to me, not Elliot, me. For a long time, I couldn't move. When my grandfather died, the will read in court named my brother as the sole heir. I'd believed it. I'd mourned the loss of his faith in me more than his death itself. But this This was the truth they'd buried. My phone rang, sharp and sudden. "Is this Anastasia Crowell?" a gravelly voice asked. "My name's Caleb Finch. I used to work with your grandfather's lawyer." The words caught in my throat. "He disappeared," Caleb continued. 15 years ago, after refusing to change your grandfather's will. He thought the old man had hidden the real one somewhere. Maybe he trusted you to find it." My pulse hammered in my ears. The world around me seemed to tilt. This wasn't betrayal anymore. It was conspiracy. I slipped the will back into its envelope and wrote across it in steady ink. "Patience is power." Because for the first time, I understood. The Crowells hadn't just stolen from me. They'd committed a crime, and I was done pretending not to see it. Caleb met me at a quiet cafe by the Willamette River, the kind of place where no one lingered long enough to notice two strangers trading secrets. He slid a small, scratched USB drive across the table. "This came from the archive boxes at Gerald and Pine," he said. "Found it in a stack marked for shredding." When I plugged it in, a tremor of static filled the speakers, followed by the frail, trembling voice of an old man. "Raymond and Vivian Crowell forced me to change the air. I was scared of them, but I kept the original until I could give it to Anastasia." The cafe noise vanished around me. The lawyer had known I would come back one day. The truth had been waiting for me all along. Caleb turned his laptop toward me, pulling up a scanned will. "The signature looks real," he said. "That's because it is. They lifted your grandfather's signature from a 1997 document. It's an old copy pasted onto the fake will." I studied the ink strokes, shaky but familiar. They hadn't forged his name. They'd recycled his honesty. Rage flared, then froze into clarity. You can fake a signature, I thought, but not integrity, back home. I dug through an old cabinet and found bank statements from the 1990s. One line stood out. Account holder, Gerald Crowell and Anastasia Crowell. But when I searched the bank's digital records, my name was gone, erased clean. "Someone with power did that," Caleb muttered. I took screenshots, stored them in an encrypted drive, and looked up at him. "So what now?" he asked. "Now," I said, "we do this right. No noise, no blood, just the truth, cold and clean." My coffee sat untouched, gone icy by the time we left. 3 weeks later, Caleb and I drove south to Salem. The air smelled of rain and old wood when we entered the nursing home. Mrs. Henley, my grandfather's former housekeeper, sat wrapped in a blanket, her hands trembling, but her eyes sharp as glass. I showed her a faded photograph she'd mailed me years ago. Her voice wavered but didn't break. "Mr. Gerald signed the will in his study upstairs. I was there. I took a picture. Your mother stood right behind him." She reached into a drawer and pulled out a heavy album, its corners worn. On the last page was the proof I didn't know I'd been chasing: my grandfather, pen in hand, the lawyer beside him, and my mother, Vivian, staring straight into the camera. I couldn't breathe. "Would you testify, if needed?" "If the court asks," she said softly. "But child, they destroyed every original. This is all I have left." On the drive back, the sky turned steel gray. Caleb's voice was barely a whisper. "If she still has that photo, they'll come for her." He was right. When I opened my apartment door that night, drawers were overturned, my computer smashed. Everything was gone, except a single sheet of paper lying on my desk. Legacy isn't given, it's built. I stood there, staring at the handwriting under the flickering light. It was my grandfather's phrase, the one he used whenever I doubted myself. Maybe whoever left it hadn't come to threaten me, but to remind me what I was fighting for. I sat down, exhaustion heavy but steady resolve rising in its place. They thought I was fragile because I stayed silent. What they never understood was that silence isn't weakness, it's timing. And my time was coming. Elliot's message came late, saying the family wanted to talk one last time, at the lake house at Crater Lake, where my grandfather once taught me to row. I knew it wasn't peace, it was control again. The house glowed gold under candlelight. My mother seated like a queen in pearls. My father still crisp in his dark suit. Elliot sipping wine, pretending confidence. He looked at me and said, "You still think you're better than us, don't you?" I said nothing. My fingers brushed the recorder hidden in my jacket. My father smiled thin as glass. "We don't have to keep fighting. Anna signed this and it's over." The paper on the table was a waiver of inheritance. I picked up the pen, pretending to consider. Elliot laughed. "She doesn't need to carry Dad's mess anymore. He already took care of that old lawyer, right, Dad?" Silence thickened. My mother gasped. My father's eyes flashed. But it was too late. The recorder had it all. I laid the pen down now. "I know he didn't disappear from old age," I said, and walked away, leaving their whine and panic behind. That night, Caleb called, his voice low. Raymond Crowell offered me money to forget. He said I recorded it. He sent the file, my father's voice calm. "We just want to protect the family name. You'll get more if you forget this." I forwarded it to federal prosecutor Sandra Nguyen. She said, "I've been waiting 7 years for this, Anna. Now it's their turn." A cold clarity filled me. Justice was no longer a dream, but motion. Rain followed me back to Portland, lights smearing across the highway, like memories. I turned toward the cemetery, the ground soft beneath my shoes. My grandfather's headstone was worn, but the words still there. "Integrity builds legacy." I laid white orchids on the stone, whispering, "I'm not reclaiming money, I'm reclaiming truth." The wind lifted a note from my pocket. "Legacy isn't given. It's built." The same line, left after my office was broken into. I finally understood it came from Gerald Pine, the lawyer who vanished his last warning before they silenced him. My phone buzzed. A message from my mother. "Tomorrow try to smile when they convict you." I answered, "You taught me silence, Mother, but not how to use it for lies, back home." I gathered the evidence, the will, the photograph, the recordings, the bribe video, placing them in my leather case, each page a blade of truth. I caught my reflection in the mirror. One woman destroyed, another rebuilt tomorrow. I whispered, "They'll stop laughing." Rain tapped against the glass, steady like a countdown to justice. The courthouse in Multnomah glared under white lights. Cameras flashing outside, reporters shouting the name, Crowell Estates, as if it were already a scandal carved into history. I walked in wearing black, my hair tied tight, the echo of my heels slicing through the noise. Inside, my mother sat straight, a smile sharp enough to draw blood, my father's jaw locked. My brother leaned back in his chair, arrogant calm. Their attorney glanced at me and smirked. "They'll crush you, Miss Crowell." I looked at him once. "I'm not here to crush anyone. I said I'm here for the truth." The first video played Elliot's voice from the lake house filling the room. Dad already handled that old lawyer. "Remember?" The air snapped. My mother shot up, shouting, "That's edited." The judge's gavel slammed silence. Then came the second file. Caleb's recording, my father's voice steady. "We just want to protect the family name. You'll get more if you forget this." The room froze, lights from the cameras glinting off his face, his hands trembling. I stood and placed a sealed envelope before the judge. My grandfather's letter read aloud. "If she stands before you, she has already carried more weight than any man in this family." The judge lowered his eyes, then spoke. "This case isn't complicated, it's criminal." The sound hit like thunder. Their lawyer slumped, my parents pale, my brother silent. I exhaled slow. They laughed when I walked in. They weren't laughing when I walked out. The trial stretched deep into the afternoon, the courtroom heavy with the weight of hours and the hum of whispered tension. Sunlight slipped through the high windows, painting gold streaks across the wooden table where the last papers lay. The air was so still, it seemed afraid to move. Judge Mitchell's voice finally broke the silence, steady, calm, final. The court recognizes the original will of Ms. Anastasia Crowell. Crowell Estates and all related holdings are to be returned to her. The defendants, Raymond Vivian and Elliot Crowell, are to be referred to the federal prosecutor on charges of forgery and obstruction of justice. The room erupted. Flashes flickered. Reporters shouted questions, their words blurring into white noise. My mother's sob cracked the air. My father stared down his shoulders, caving under the weight of his own silence. Elliot leaned forward, his face pale, his whisper barely audible. "You won, Anna, but we lost everything." I turned to him, my voice quiet. I didn't take anything, I just gave back what they destroyed. The gavel struck one final time, a sound more like release than judgment. I gathered my files slowly, the same ones they once tried to erase the ones that outlasted their pride. Judge Mitchell descended from the bench. His face softened as he stopped beside me, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Your grandfather would be proud," he said. I met his gaze, calm, steady, he already is. For a heartbeat, the years folded the first day I'd walked into his courtroom. The trembling in his hand now made sense. He'd known my grandfather. He'd known what kind of man he was, and what kind of storm I'd walked through to stand here. The circle had closed. Outside the corridor blazed with camera lights. Reporters pressed forward, calling my name Miss Crowell. How does it feel to finally get revenge? I paused just long enough to meet their eyes. "Justice doesn't shout," I said, then turned away. The doors swung open behind me, closing with a muted thud. The noise inside faded, replaced by the quiet hum of the city. The late afternoon light streamed through the glass, like a ribbon of mercy cutting across the floor. It reminded me of the lake, the shimmer of sun on water, the day my grandfather told me that truth never sinks. As I stepped outside, the air tasted clean. The courthouse behind me no longer looked like a place of judgment, but of clarity. Each flash from the cameras caught a glint of light on the silver handle of the gavel left behind inside, transforming it from a weapon into a symbol of release. I didn't smile. I didn't raise my hands. I simply walked forward, letting the wind lift the edge of my hair. The world finally quiet. And in that quiet, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace, not triumph. Peace. The light followed me down the steps, warm and unyielding, like the truth itself. I drove back to the lake house at Crater Lake as the day folded into dusk, the same place where it all began. The air was sharp and still, the water smooth as glass, reflecting a sky streaked in pale gold. I sat at the edge of the wooden dock, the boards creaking softly beneath me, and pulled the old letter from my pocket, the one my grandfather had written long before I understood its weight. I flicked open the silver lighter, the flame catching the fading light, and watched the paper curl and blacken. The firelight trembled against my face before I released it to the wind. The ashes scattered across the lake carried away into silence. They laughed when I walked in, but I walked out free. A year later, I opened the Crowell Foundation for Integrity and Governance, dedicated to defending those wrongly accused in public service. I didn't do it for glory. I did it because justice without compassion becomes cruelty. The press called my story the quiet verdict, and I let them. It fit what it was, a truth that didn't need to shout. During one interview, the host leaned forward, asking, "Do you forgive them?" I smiled. Not for the camera, but for myself. "Forgiveness isn't letting them go," I said. "It's letting myself live." Now I teach at the Portland School of Law in the same city where my family once ruled the skyline. In my classroom, chalk dust clings to my fingers as I write 2 lines across the board. Integrity builds legacy. Legacy isn't given, it's built. The students watch quietly, not knowing the words, once came from a man who believed in me when no one else did. Light streams through the tall windows, catching the chalk lines, turning them to silver. The glow is the same as the one that filtered through the courtroom that day. Steady, honest, unblinking. I pause for a moment, breathing in the sound of the wind moving across the trees outside, carrying the faint echo of water against the dock. When class ends, I stay behind, watching the last of the sunlight drift across the floor. The reflection on the glass feels alive, almost like a heartbeat. I close my eyes, and for the first time in years, the quiet doesn't feel empty. It feels full, peaceful, forgiven. The story ends where it began, beside the lake. But this time, there is no fear, no bitterness, only calm. The wind hums, the water stirs, and the light keeps dancing across the surface as if whispering the only verdict that ever mattered. It's letting myself live.